two things you would have never thought that would be in the same sentence are the words Alienware and entry-level gaming laptop. Well, at the end of last year, they sort of hinted that there was going to be something coming in the pipeline, and it's finally here. This is the Alienware 15. This is their entry-level price point laptop, and I've been using it now for a couple of days, and boy, have I got some thoughts. To be perfectly clear, this is a hands-on preview, and no, it isn't sponsored. It isn't a review either, since the internals on this sample aren't final yet. This thing goes on sale today, and I think people need a heads up before popping down the money Alienware's actually asking for it. Anyways, I guess you could say that the 15 is Alienware's I guess you would call it answer to the likes of the TUF A16 and F16 along with the Lock 15. And you know what? At first glance, it actually looks really good. And in a lot of ways, it sort of personifies what's going on with entry-level laptops these days. Not every single one of them, but the vast majority of them are getting better and better in terms of overall build quality and the way that they look. And yes, this one's build quality is pretty solid, even though this is a completely plastic chassis. There is not a hint of metal or aluminum anywhere here. There are a few hints of cost cutting though, like the lid. It bends a bit when you're opening it, but otherwise, even for an early sample, there's hardly any flexing on the top cover or on the keyboard deck. But I have to say, and this is a pet peeve of mine, this thing is a fingerprint like magnet. I don't know why so many manufacturers do this over and over and over again. It is absolutely terrible. Look, I would not want to bring this to a coffee shop or to class or anywhere public without a microfiber cloth and like some Windex or invisible glass, even with a little bit of handling. I don't know if you can see it here on camera, but I just opened it up. This thing looks absolutely terrible. After a day of use, you're just gonna feel embarrassed bringing this with you anywhere. On the flip side of that coin, you can also tell the Alienware 15 is reaching out to a pretty wide audience here. So nothing particularly screams like gamer from the rooftops, and the looks are understated enough that it can fit into classrooms or coffee shop environments while also being relatively portable. And look, I'm saying relatively here because this thing is far from either thin or light for that matter. But I guess under 5 pounds is like a decent area to be for a gaming laptop. And this does admittedly feel smaller than it actually is, both visually and when you're actually handling it. It's also nice to see they didn't sort of cheap out on ports like TUF does by using USB 3.2 Gen 1 everywhere on their AMD laptops. Instead, you get a single Type-C that runs at Gen 2 speeds, but the rest, yes, they're all a lot slower. Meanwhile, the remainder of the I/O is pretty much par for the course here for an entry-level gaming laptop. But yes, I still hate seeing this. I mean, the processors used on the Alienware 15 natively support USB 4, so like what gives? Again, it all comes down to cost cutting. A few pennies here, a few bucks there. Anyways, the keyboard and trackpad, well, I don't want to spend too much time here since this is a pre-production unit. So let's just say they're not good, but they're also not terrible. They work, they're functional, and that's about all I can say. I also think that Alienware might be setting themselves up for a little bit of failure here too, because look, other than this sort of iridescent alien head on the cover, there's like nothing here that really screams Alienware. A lot of their iconic design has sort of like been cast aside in order to hit a given price point. And yes, there is this Alienware writing right here underneath the screen, but other than that, you can slap any logo on this thing and it would pretty much pass for another manufacturer's laptop. I mean, sure, you get that handy V-rail front edge for easy opening and closing, but this just looks, like I said, a generic laptop instead of something distinctly Alienware. And I think in the short term, and maybe even the long term, that's gonna become a little bit of a problem for this specific device. When people see this in their local Best Buy or Costco next to the Lock 15, TUF A16, the F16, and even something like the MSI Katana, well, there's nothing special that jumps out. Okay, look, yes, the Katana does feel a whole lot cheaper, but as a matter of fact, I'd argue the Lock and TUF look, feel, and even present themselves a heck of a lot better, like to a whole other level. Then again, some might just hate the slightly more gamery vibe on the TUF series. And I think one of the main reasons why this thing looks so, I guess you'd say, like mid at first glance, is because of the screen that Alienware chose for this thing. And you have to admit, right, when you're walking through any big box store, shopping for a laptop, the one thing that catches your eye is a bright, punchy screen. And the one that's on this has to be like one of the worst screens I've seen on a gaming laptop, and I'm not kidding you. In the last like 3 or 4 years, it seems like it's out of a completely different era. It's dim, there's laughable viewing angles, and even based on Alienware's most optimistic on-paper measurement, it only covers 62.5% of the sRGB color spectrum. Obviously, the product team had a choice here, either panel speed or quality, but you can't have both. And they decided on 165 Hz over proper contrast, color accuracy, saturation, and brightness. Look, I'm not saying laptops from Lock and TUF have like the pinnacle of screens, but at the very least, their options do hit 100% of the sRGB color space. And you also have to ask yourself, or at least the product planners have to have asked themselves, is 165 Hz on a laptop of this caliber with the specs that this thing has really worthwhile? And I'd beg to say absolutely not, because with the specs that you're going to see, this thing isn't really going to hit 165 frames per second in most situations anyways. So all we're looking at here is a little bit of, I don't know, refresh rate window dressing to make this thing look a lot better than it really is. Now about those specs, that's another area where Alienware unfortunately seems to have cut quite a few corners. It's like they went into some sort of back of house and they shook a parts bin of just random components that were launched years ago and saw what fell out, and that's what they put into this laptop. Or at least that's what they did with the base spec, because here in North America, it'll be an RTX 4050 paired with either a Ryzen 5 220 or an Intel Core 5 210H. So what you're getting here is rebranded Zen 4 and Intel 13th gen CPUs, architectures that were launched more than 2 years ago. Other regions have their base config start at, wait for it, an RTX 3050. Yes, in 2026, we're still gonna see RTX 3050 laptops being launched into other markets outside of North America. And this whole thing can be spec'd up to an Intel Core 7 270H or Ryzen 7 260 alongside an RTX 5060. Thank God that there's 5000 series options here, but at that point, you'll probably be in like Alienware Aurora pricing territory. Add to that a total graphics power of just 70 watts for the RTX 3000 and 4000 series GPUs and 85 watts for the 5000 series, and that's just not enough in my books. Not when the Lock 15 and TUF 16 series are sitting out there with a TGP of 115 watts. There's also single channel memory regardless of how much capacity you spec. Even up to 32 gigs, you're still getting a single stick. Luckily, getting into this thing is relatively easy, and upgrade options are pretty straightforward too. You have a single memory slot that's unpopulated and room for a larger SSD, but there isn't a second open M.2 slot, something again which both Lock and TUF do give you. So even though we haven't benchmarked them apples to apples against one another, just with knowing that, we absolutely positively know that the Alienware 15 is going to be facing a massive uphill battle against its direct competitors that push more wattage to both the CPU and the GPU. And subjectively speaking, in a three-way horse race between it, the Lock 15, and the TUF A or F16, it ends up sitting between the Lock and the TUF models in terms of build quality and connectivity, but it is dead last when it comes to critical touch points like the keyboard, trackpad, and screen quality. Also, at least here in North America, it's trailing behind the others with its base spec getting a tiny little 54 watt-hour battery. Spec it out with an RTX 5000 series GPU, and you do get upgraded to that 70 watt-hour unit though. And even with all of those pennies being pinched and the spec corners being cut in order to get this thing into what you would call like a good price range for the entry-level market these days, well, you all know it. This whole space in the budget gaming laptop market has become completely and utterly lately. Like what was an $800 US laptop in December of last year now costs about 40%. Yes, 40% more. And that's without taking sales into account. Yeah, you're reading that right. $1,500 freaking dollars for an RTX 5050 and an Intel 13th gen CPU. And then when you compare the sale prices between now and then, we're closer to a 75% price hike. And what does that all mean for this Alienware 15? I've held off talking about it until this moment because you need to wrap your head around things and understand where everything is going here. So the Alienware 15 in its North American base spec. So with a Ryzen 220, RTX 450, 16 gigs of single channel memory, and a 512 gig SSD is going to be $1,300 US, or over $1,600 Canadian. And I'm going to let that sink in a little bit. That is an entry-level gaming laptop in 2026. And that price point hurts even more when you consider we're sitting at this odd point in the market where 2025 models launched more than a year ago with a better CPU and GPU are still sitting around at prices that absolutely, positively just demolished the Alienware 15. And no, this is not an Alienware exclusive problem either. Laptops like the Omen 15, Lock 15, and now the Alienware 15 are the first warning signs that there's a pricing tsunami on its way. And in some cases, it just hasn't hit land yet. The problem here is that Alienware is late to the table and they haven't brought anything very unique here. You can put any laptop next to this. You could put the locks, the MSIs, the gigabytes, and it becomes just one of a bunch. Meanwhile, Alienware's DNA is built on offering unique features, unique designs, and we're just not seeing that here. We're seeing more of the same, just a lot later in the game. So unless Alienware does something crazy and maybe undercuts everyone else significantly on price, there's nothing really compelling right now that makes me want to say, hey, you absolutely have to buy this over the competition. Until that point, look, I'm Mike with Hardware Canucks, and I will see you in the next one. And here is all praying that we see a little bit of downwards movement instead of that incoming tidal wave when it comes to laptop pricing this year and next year. Have a great day, guys.